October 2023, a narrow street in northern Gaza. A Hamas anti-tank team has positioned itself in a building overlooking the road. They have a Cornet, a laser-guided Russian anti-tank missile that can punch through 1,200 millimeters of rolled steel armor. It is the weapon that destroyed American M1 Abrams tanks in Iraq. It is the weapon that disabled Merkava tanks in Lebanon in 2006. They wait for the vehicle to enter the kill zone. The vehicle that appears is not a tank. It is an APC, an armored personnel carrier, the category of vehicle that has always been the softer target, the vehicle you hit when you can't hit the tank. It weighs 60 tons. It is heavier than the Russian T-90M main battle tank. It is heavier than the French Leclerc. It is the heaviest APC ever built by any army in the history of armored warfare. Around its sides, 4 radar panels scan in every direction at once. The Cornet is fired. The radar detects it in milliseconds. A counter-projectile launches from the hull side. The missile is destroyed 3 meters from the vehicle. The APC continues forward. Its name was the Namer. It was built on the chassis of Israel's most advanced main battle tank. Its armor was heavier than the tank it came from. Every ton of weight saved by removing the gun turret was reinvested directly into protection, and it carried 9 soldiers through the most dangerous urban battlefield on Earth as if the missiles were not there. To understand why the Namer existed, you need to understand what Israel had been learning since 1973. In the Yom Kippur War, Egyptian and Syrian forces fired Soviet Sagar anti-tank missiles in quantities that had never been seen before on any battlefield. Israeli tank crews discovered that the vehicles they had trusted were vulnerable in ways nobody had fully anticipated. In the following decades, the anti-tank guided missile proliferated across every conflict zone in the Middle East. By the time Israel entered Lebanon in 1982, Hezbollah was acquiring Cornets, the most capable anti-tank missiles in the Soviet arsenal. By 2006, in the Second Lebanon War, Hezbollah fired more than 1,000 anti-tank missiles at Israeli armored vehicles over 34 days. They hit Merkava tanks. They disabled vehicles that had been considered nearly invulnerable. And Israeli soldiers riding in M1113 armored personnel carriers, thin-skinned aluminium boxes designed in America in 1960, died in numbers that created a political and military crisis inside the IDF. The M1113 was adequate when it was designed to carry troops across open terrain behind a tank advance. It was not adequate in the close-range, ambush-heavy urban combat that Israel was fighting. Every Israeli soldier who died in an M1113 was in some sense a casualty of a procurement decision made decades earlier when the threat was different. The IDF had known this for years. The budget had always found other priorities. The idea of putting infantry in a vehicle as heavily armored as a tank was not new to Israel. Israel had been doing it since the early 1980s, when obsolete Centurion tank hulls were stripped of their turrets and converted into armored personnel carriers. The Nagmashat, the Nagmashan, the Nakpadan, heavy, slow, but proof against everything that the M113 could not stop. Then Israel began converting captured T-54 and T-55 Soviet tanks into the Aksarit, an APC so heavily protected that it became the preferred vehicle for urban operations in Gaza and the West Bank. The principle was validated by every engagement. Heavy protection saved lives. The question was how to build something that combined that protection with the mobility and capability of the Merkava rather than the obsolescence of a 50-year-old Soviet tank. The answer was the Namer. Development began in earnest after the 2004 Gaza conflict exposed the M113's vulnerability to IEDs and RPGs in sustained operations. The decision was made to build a new vehicle on the Merkava Mark IV chassis rather than convert retiring Merkava Mark I hulls, because a purpose-built vehicle could be optimized in ways a conversion could not. The first production Namers entered IDF service in late 2008. The engineering was a statement of priorities rather than a conventional design process. Every decision flowed from a single proposition: the soldiers inside this vehicle are worth as much as the crew of the tank beside it, and they deserve the same protection. The Merkava Mark IV chassis provided the foundation, a hull designed around crew survivability from its first iteration in 1979, with the engine mounted in the front so that the engine block sits between the crew and any frontal threat. If a round penetrates the front armor, it must pass through the engine before reaching anyone inside. The Namer kept this layout and used the weight saved by removing the 60-ton Merkava's main gun turret, roughly 10 tons, to add armor rather than reduce the vehicle's overall weight. The result was a vehicle that weighed 60 tons with armor heavier than the tank it came from. Brigadier General Yaron Livnat, who oversaw its development, described it directly. The weight saved by eliminating the turret was reinvested in beefing up the armor. The composite armor matrix surrounding the crew compartment combined ceramic, steel, and nickel alloy in a modular configuration that could be upgraded as threat assessments changed. The belly armor was shaped into a reinforced V-hull to deflect IED blasts. The rear door, wide enough for 9 soldiers to exit rapidly under fire, was inherited from the Merkava's original design, which had included a rear exit for crew escape and casualty evacuation since 1979. Then came Trophy. The Rafael Trophy Active Protection System, known in Hebrew as Windbreaker, uses 4 flat-panel radar antennas mounted on the vehicle to provide 360-degree coverage. When the radar detects an incoming anti-tank missile or RPG, it calculates the projectile's trajectory, threat type, and time to impact in milliseconds, then fires a directed blast of countermeasure projectiles to intercept and destroy the threat before it reaches the hull. The system had been under development since the early 2000s and entered operational service on Merkava tanks in 2011. Putting it on an APC was uniquely Israeli in its logic. No other army in the world equips its personnel carriers with hard-kill active protection systems. The calculation Israel made was explicit. The soldiers inside the Namur are at least as valuable as the tank crew beside them, and protecting them with the same technology is worth the cost and the weight. By 2016, newly produced Namurs were being fitted with Trophy as standard. By October 2023, every Namur operating in Gaza carried it. The IDF reported an interception success rate of approximately 85 to 90% during the 2023 to 2025 Gaza and Lebanon operations, hundreds of confirmed interceptions of Cornets, RPG-29s, and Iranian-made guided missiles. The Cornet that could destroy an Abrams tank was being intercepted in mid-air, 3 meters from an APC, and the soldiers inside did not feel it. The combat record in Gaza from October 2023 forward was the most demanding test the Namur had faced. Urban warfare at close range, buildings rigged with explosives, tunnel networks concealing ambush teams, FPV drones dropping grenades onto vehicle roofs, anti-tank teams firing from positions chosen specifically to defeat armor. In Operation Protective Edge in 2014, no Namur was lost despite intense anti-armor engagement across 3 weeks of high-threat urban operations. In the 2023 war, the record was more complicated. On October 24, 2023, 11 soldiers from the Givati Brigade's Tsebar Battalion were killed when their Namur was struck by an anti-tank guided missile. On June 15, 2024, 8 soldiers were killed, possibly due to a detonation of explosives carried on the exterior of the vehicle, the carpet mine-clearing system rather than the hull itself. And on June 24, 2024, Al-Qassam Brigades published footage of a Namur being struck by a Chinese HJ-8 ATGM, causing an external fire on the carried demining equipment while the vehicle itself remained operational. The pattern that emerged from these engagements was significant. The Namur's hull was not penetrated. Casualties occurred when external equipment was detonated, when top attack munitions delivered by drones exploited the thinner roof armor that the Trophy system's radar coverage could not reliably intercept from directly above, and when the sheer volume of simultaneous attacks overwhelmed the counter-projectile capacity. The vehicle's designers had not encountered FPV drone swarms in 2008, when the Namur was designed. Nobody had. The Namur 1500, unveiled in June 2023 and deployed in Gaza that October, addressed some of these gaps with a 1500 horsepower engine upgrade and enhanced drone awareness systems. The weight of the Namur attracted consistent criticism from defense analysts, who saw it as an extravagance that no other army could afford or justify. At 60 tons, it was heavier than the Russian T-90M at 46.5 tons, heavier than the French Leclerc at 57 tons, heavier than the American M2 Bradley infantry fighting vehicle at 30 tons. It could not be airlifted in strategic transport aircraft. It stressed bridges. It consumed fuel at rates that complicated logistics. The American Army, evaluating the Namur against requirements for the Ground Combat Vehicle program in 2012, concluded that the vehicle met some requirements but not enough without significant redesign. The Congressional Budget Office estimated that buying Namurs instead of developing a new American vehicle would save $9 billion and meet the required 9-man carrying capacity, but the Army declined. The weight, the cost, the strategic immobility. These were the objections that every conventional procurement analysis produced. Israel's response to every one of them was the same. Israel does not fight wars across oceans. It fights them on its own borders, in terrain measured in kilometers rather than thousands of miles. Its road network and bridges are built for heavy military traffic. The Namur will never need to board a ship or a C-17 transport aircraft. It needs to drive into the most dangerous streets in Gaza and bring 9 soldiers through to the other side. 60 tons is what that costs. The alternative, lighter vehicles and more casualties, is a cost Israel has calculated and rejected. The U.S. Army did eventually validate a part of Israel's logic by installing Trophy on its own M1A2 Abrams tanks. Germany followed on the Leopard 2, Britain fitted it to the Challenger 3, the active protection system Israel developed for the APC and Merkava is now considered the most proven hard-kill counter-missile system on Earth, with over 2 million operational hours accumulated and interception rates that no passive armor alone could achieve. The APC remains in Israeli service, expanding slowly due to budgetary constraints that have repeatedly delayed the planned replacement of 800 M1113s. The APC 1500 production version is actively operating in Gaza as of 2026. No other army has built an APC with comparable protection. October 2023, a narrow street in Gaza. A Cornet missile at 3 meters, a counter-projectile in milliseconds, 9 soldiers inside a 60-ton Leopard that the budget officials said was too heavy and the engineers said was exactly right. The Cornet did not reach them. The APC continued forward. In the mathematics of Israeli armored warfare, that outcome is the only number that counts.